break from everything, I guess.
Yeah, you feel them, looking forward to it, a little bit tired, perhaps. Yeah.
All right, I am back. Does anyone object to being recorded? Okay, I assume not, but if so, I guess just don't say anything and turn off your video. If someone would help us remind new people when they join that it's being recorded, that would be nice. All right, I'll go ahead and... Actually, it looks like we have this account set to auto record, so we are recording already. So there we go.
So looking at our meeting agenda for this time, did anyone have items that they wanted to put on the agenda? I do have some stuff that I could go over, but just want to make sure that we cover things first. Jordan and B are here on any UI work. Santoshi, if you want to talk about docs at all. Philip, please feel free to add anything that you want.
I have something that I wanted to add. I'll just note it on here.
I'm just posting in the Flux contributors Slack channel because Stefan thought that we canceled this meeting last week.
I see.
But it's kind of hard to cancel the meeting if we did it during the European time meeting.
Yeah. I mean, I'm certainly happy to chat with everyone here. We're all here for the time block, I'm assuming.
We can still run this, so I don't think there's...
I don't have anything to add UI-wise. Just chugging along with pull requests. I'm assigning those PRs to the maintainers, so hit Stefan and Michael. Are other people available for pull request reviews, or how does that work from a governance perspective?
So sorry, the question is getting reviews on UI PRs. What's the governance?
Yeah, can I assign it to other folks chime in, or how does that work?
I think it would be great if we could get some feedback, especially from people who would be interested in using the UI or have an interest in how it develops beyond just our maintainers in the project. And I wouldn't say that like Stefan necessarily is, an example of somebody who's authoritative on like UI development code review.
Well, I guess that's part of the problem, right? Is I'm mainly asking for stuff around the Kubernetes type stuff. There's nobody on the team that the maintainers that's going to be super familiar, I would think. But so yeah, I'll just keep moving along. Anybody can chime in if they want on the pull request reviews. But
yeah, if we could identify some end user or some community member who would also be authoritative, who could help with code review, even if it would be a learning experience for them, then that would be, I'm sure it would help with code quality, and kind of requires like a lot of context to have like a holistic review.
And from a governance, agreed. And from a governance perspective, it's really just you and Bianca, Jordan, because you're in the maintainers file. In most other maintainers files, we've also added the core Flux maintainers as kind of a link out to them, and that hasn't been added to this yet. So that have to be added. Otherwise, it's really just you two that make the decision on this repo.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it certainly would be. You mean, you're the maintainer, so you can decide like, hey, let's include some folks if they're willing to get involved, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I feel like we could use some support when it just comes to front-end development. Like I can test Jordan's code and make it work, and for me it's more about look and feel. I don't have so much knowledge of best practices, and so yeah, we could use some backup.
Well, I think for me, what I need is more on the Kubernetes stuff. That's where I feel pretty confident in the front end part, obviously. But I was just curious as far as I've just been assigning to those three people, to Michael, Hida, and Stefan. Is there other people I can assign things to? Is my main question.
I have limited time, but you can.
Sorry.
No, you go. Sorry.
I don't have a member or contributor badge yet, but I'm more than happy to review some things. As far as front end stuff, I know what bad design looks like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
That's a good start.
And I'm kind of limited in time right now, but I can try if you try to ping me or something like that. I'll try to review some Kubernetes stuff if you need.
Okay. Yeah, I was just it's not a big deal. I was just curious because I keep just like how the projects are supposed to run is my main question. Not really. We don't need that much more capacity. I was just curious if it was like something that you guys do round robin on pull request reviews, or how do you do that? But we'll just keep going, and I'll also invite some people to take a look. The PRs are coming pretty fast in the initial part, so a lot of big chunks are getting taken out at once.
Yeah, starting with next week, no one will be able to review or merge anything.
Okay.
And there will be no Slack support or nothing.
So I guess again, this goes back to governance. Are we just gonna like should I just let the PRs linger and then, or should I just merge stuff without a review necessarily?
Sorry, I didn't got your message. What did you say?
Oh, my question is like, should I just wait and leave those for when people get back, those reviews, or should I just merge stuff without maybe just Bianca reviewing or something?
Well, you shouldn't be able to merge. If you
that's
can
true. Yeah.
pull request that not reviewed, then someone made a mistake when configuring
Okay.
your access. Can you merge pull requests that are not reviewed?
No, but I was just, if Bianca had reviewed it, is that enough, or do we want to have a review from one of the core maintainers?
Oh, no, it's okay if Bianca
Okay, great.
has approved, then I guess she also tested it. It should be fine.
Great, okay.
But just to clarify, like that's the limit. I'm just testing it and approving that it looks good and fits with our idea. I'm not validating how everything is structured and organized.
Okay, I will sort of scope it to front end stuff then if we do that. So
yeah, I guess here with the UI there are two different things, right? One is reviewing a pull request that, I don't know, adds Golang code that talks to the Kubernetes API to Flux custom resource definitions and so on. And that should be reviewed by someone that works on Flux version 2. And there is the other part where, let's say you have a pull request that, I don't know, creates a web page, CSS, HTML, JavaScript, and so on. And that could, I don't know, I'm not I'm not the one that can review such a pull request because last time I've touched TypeScript was years ago. So I cannot.
that makes sense.
Say it right.
I'm happy to help out a bit though as well, actually.
Oh,
Do some
hi, Simon.
reviews. Hey.
Oh, hi, Simon.
Hey guys.
I didn't know you were here.
No, it was a bit late, sorry. But yeah, for sure. Reviewing stuff, yeah. Easy peasy.
Yeah, I think we should have the pull requests separate, like have a pull request first that changes the API, the Golang code, get that merged, reviewed, and then open a pull request that consumes that API. And that's, I don't know, only JavaScript and CSS and stuff like that.
That makes
Does
sense.
that work, Jordan?
I think it does split things up quite a bit, especially in the beginning when I'm trying to sort of knock out major pieces. If
Yeah,
that's what's best.
sounds like it would be hard to work on.
If that's what's, as we get sort of more stuff in there, that makes more sense. I'm also adding some unit tests, so I don't need the UI as much to test, just to make sure that everything's working. So that'll be coming soon, probably today. And I'll try to keep that in mind. I try to keep my commits that way. So the commits within the PR or UI commits is mostly React and front end stuff, and then there's separate commits for the back end stuff. But yeah, we'll try to make them easier to review as they get smaller. Right now they're so big, there's so much stuff going in at once. But I'll keep that in mind.
Yeah, another thing we could do to make this better is to add an end-to-end test that spins up Kubernetes kind, runs Flux install, so it installs everything, custom resource definition, whatever. Then you can use the Flux CLI to create Git repos, customizations, and then test the actual API. Okay,
Yeah,
I think
that'll be.
Can I see it?
Yeah, that'll be next. I think right now I'm trying to just do kind of unit tests on the different backend routes and handlers and stuff. I think the next thing will be kind of like an end-to-end test, and then also kind of doing some snapshots so that the UI actually uses real data and renders things once we have more stuff to render. But it's coming along. That's all I have for the group.
Nice. Well, yeah, hopefully we can figure out how to get more help and more eyes on the UI stuff. And guess we can move on to Scott's request to discuss a little bit of the Flux project description, which kind of has to do with like, why are we doing this thing, and the context of like justifying it to the CNCF, that we're more than just a sandbox project.
Yeah, exactly. So what sparked me thinking about this was what Lee just mentioned. There's a due diligence document for CNCF reviewing Flux as a project for incubation. The status is that it is being reviewed, and that document still has to be completed, but it's mostly there. I mean, I think everyone agrees that Flux should be an incubation. So don't want to count chickens before they hatch, but it seems like we're in a good place there. However, some of the questions have brought up, I think, have raised some gaps in the project. At least it seems that way to me. And one of them is the scope, the project scope. So scope in general is, not just a description of what the project is, but what the limits of where it intends to go. And as I was trying to look for a description of the scope of Flux, I couldn't really find one that seemed to be correct or that fit the current scope. So I thought perhaps our description of the project itself could maybe use a little bit of an update. So in short, our description says that, this is only one of several descriptions, but this is one that we're using in several places. It's saying that we're keeping Kubernetes clusters in sync with sources of configuration and then automating updates to configuration. That's not totally accurate. I mean, in part, yeah, that's one of the use cases, but you know, it's really just the state of operations overall. I think this is just a proposal from what I'm seeing, and I wanted to get feedback from the rest of the group, and that it's not just the state of a cluster that is kept in sync, but the state of your operations wherever they happen to live, as long as we have an operator or an operator built on top of Flux that does that. So, for example, the customized controller when integrated with CAPI resources won't just, you know, create workloads in a cluster, but can actually spin up completely new clusters. Someone could build I think Stefan mentioned in another comment somewhere, someone could build, for example, another synchronization tool that keeps S3 up to date. Actually, I think we already do that, right, with our bucket source controller. But one could be built
way around. Yeah.
Right, the opposite. Yeah, but or I think we still store artifacts somewhere. But in any case, it could be, you know, I think it's well within Flux's scope to make such controllers built on the Flux SDK. So I just wanted to take the temperature of the room.
Yeah, and currently we don't do, we have the webhook receiver configuration, right? But it might not be outside of the scope of a portion of the Flux project to maybe maintain, like have a different approach to configuring Git repositories and that kind of thing. Like the repos themselves and their webhooks and, you know, team setups and stuff. When maybe talk about Terraform, or maybe that is out of scope, you know. But with this proposed statement that you have, it would fit. I like that you changed, like keeping Kubernetes in sync to using Kubernetes to reconcile operations. That's definitely a little bit more accurate. I don't know. Does anyone else have feedback for this kind of verbiage change on like how can we describe like what the scope and goals of Flux are?
Let's create a discussion on that.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll open it. I just wanted to at least raise it here in case there was immediate feedback, but I'll open a discussion item. Excuse me, a discussion item like Stefan suggested, and that's part of our work, part of our decision-making workflow anyway. And also we can, you know, we have some direct pull requests that we can make against the Flux docs if we want to take it from that discussion item forward. So,
yep.
Okay, thanks.
Just a quick question there.
Yeah.
So when we scope Flux, would that also then limit in the future if, for example, somebody comes with a separate project? So, for example, the plan is to take Flagger and pull it into the Flux CD org. If we in the future come with, oh, this actually works really nicely with the whole GitOps toolkit solution, and somebody is willing to say, okay, yeah, I'm willing to move it and donate it because it's better to have it official. Is the scoping, do we have to rescope like Flux then, or how does that work?
I don't think there is any, not from a governance point of view, if that's what you mean, because that's not built into, it's not built into the governance, but it would be good to do. It would be good to revisit. Basically, it's just up to the project maintainers, but I think my point of view probably is not going to be controversial here, that it's probably good for all projects to revisit their scope whenever they're considering introducing something that expands it. But it's not, it's not like set. Yeah.
I think it boils down to the amount of maintenance work. I mean, moving Flagger into Flux doesn't change anything. It's still me doing all things. But if someone else says, hey, I have this nice integration with Flux 2, it fits the GitOps toolkit, I want to donate it to Flux CD, and I'm not going to maintain it from this moment on because, you know, Flux people will deal with it. Then we have to decide, can we deal with it or not? So I'm all for, extending the toolkit with other components that are not developed by us. But if you are doing such a thing and you want to donate your project, then you also have to, keep maintaining it. Because 3 people will not be able to maintain a dozen projects. So yeah, also all the other maintainers, like, I don't know, we are trying now to expand the maintainers group to all the Flux 2 things, but I don't know, maybe there are too much for a particular person. Maybe, I don't know. Philip doesn't have time to test dozen PRs in a week or stuff like that. So after all, it's up to how much effort does it imply. And I think it's more important to think about the long-term maintenance cost. That's what really hurts, because okay, we can do a sprint and focus on a particular thing and fix it, but it's software. It's never really fixed.
It's never finished. Yeah.
Never finished. But yeah, I'm thinking about ways on how, let's say, we could create this integration with other projects, where, let's say, you create a controller that fits well with the toolkit. I'll give an example. You create a Terraform controller that uses our runtime library, emits events like we want to, uses the source API to fetch the Terraform source code from Git or buckets or whatever, right? And you don't want to donate it, you want to maintain it on your own, or you have an organization that does that. But I'm thinking there should be ways on how you could say Flux install minus, I don't know, add-ons, this particular controller, right? So maybe have a catalog where people can submit their controllers and say, hey, my controller checks all the GitOps toolkit requirements. Can you add it to the installer? And the installer will fetch the release from their own repo, and it will bundle it inside the Flux system namespace. I think that's a better approach than saying to people, hey, have to donate this stuff if you want to make it part of Flux too. I think a better approach would be having something like a catalog.
And that option could really be just like a very thin shim over like adding that controller to the customized base for Flux system.
Yeah. The important part is that all these external controllers should pass our end-to-end tests. That means you have to contribute end-to-end tests before you add your controller to the I don't know, library or marketplace or however.
For quality reasons. I think we could probably learn a lot from how HashiCorp has like failed and learned and iterated through their community management of their providers. If we want to, kind of open up maybe a separate discussion about like the extensibility of the controller ecosystem, like, and that could be interesting.
Yeah, because it's kind of funny that you mentioned the Terraform controller, because that was exactly kind of the thing I was thinking about was.
Is one of the most requested features, so that's.
Yeah, no, but it was discussed in the Flux channel last weekend, and I was looking at it, and I was like, okay, there is actually like you can execute Terraform with Go, and there's like technically this would work, and it would integrate with like the source controller. So, and I was like, I might actually like try to build this during my free time, but do we actually want to maintain this as part of Flux CD? And it was kind of, and I was like, I honestly don't think we have the capacity today to maintain it.
Definitely not.
Something that sorry.
No, you go. Yeah.
I was going to say something that looked simpler. It's related, but it's not the same thing. Is an HCL2 controller. There is definitely some dissatisfaction with Kustomize. Like it's the tool that happens to be there, and it has like through many different things that have happened. It's won some mind share in the community, and so we use Kustomize for a lot of things. But it is incredibly limited in the kinds of transformations that it can perform and the sorts of abstractions that you can create using Kustomize. There's no like make your own interface kind of thing. There's no equivalent to a Terraform or like an HCL module. But in HCL, you can do those things that would be a similar level of abstraction to a Helm chart, but it doesn't require the Helm runtime. It's all static configuration. HCL is like a very strong configuration language. There's already like HashiCorp maintains schemas, for doing Kubernetes objects. So it might like be, an area where you could create some tooling, but it's in the same space as like CDK and JK config.
Yeah. It should go in CI. We are not going to run random transformations with.
But HCL is not a transformation. Like it is a language that works as it is. Like it's
Q, JK, everything else can be run in CI. You push to a branch the final YAML, you synchronize that branch. You don't need
this
to
is
run
this is a sustainable way for us to maintain, and it's a good opinion to have for like the current constraints of our maintenance and what is already implemented in high quality. But it doesn't mean that in the future that there wouldn't be an HCL controller, either from the community or in the project itself, based off of the scope and maintenance need.
So I have a very, I'm very opinionated about this subject. My opinion is this: like the Flux controllers could have something like a runner, transformer minus controller, let's say, that takes a source, runs a transformation based on a container that you give it. That container can contain Terraform, can contain Q, can be the JK container or whatever it is. It generates the final YAML. It pushes the YAML to a bucket that's Minio running in Flux system. And then that triggers the reconciliation of the final YAML. What you get from here is you don't have the transformation errors bundled with apply errors, dry run errors, secrets decryption, and so on. If the transformation fails, it stops at that state, at that step, which is completely separate from reconciliation, and you can still reconcile the last known state.
And would we deprecate customized controller?
What?
Would we deprecate customized controller for this?
No, customized controller be the one that applies the final YAML, because customized controller can apply in a plain YAML that has no
it can apply, but what about the parts of it that are doing transformations that are in the same exact category as all of these other things?
No, that's what I'm trying to say. Like the customized controller can be used as a plain YAML applier with no.
Yeah, would we move customizations to this separate transformation pipeline for the same reasons?
No, I don't understand the question. So the
customize is not plain YAML, like a customized base. It even has remote bases and all kinds of things in there that can fail at runtime that are not technically hermetic. The patches and all that stuff, right? This is like a higher level DSL with even some remote fetching package management features. So this set of transformations, do we also cache that using the runtime? And then push it to the Minio bucket as you were suggesting, and only apply the plain manifests when using customize.
Yeah, of course you can do that.
That's what I'm getting at though, right? It's a pretty big decision. So like the opinion, it's good to have that strong opinion about it, but like other people, could argue that without re-architecting what's already there, right? Like you could definitely have an HCL controller and all that other stuff, and it would fit in with what we currently have implemented. So we would have to, decide that like what we have implemented is going to change a little bit.
You're saying the customized controller doesn't really match the strong opinion we're talking about.
Yes.
But the customized controller does match this thing if you don't give it a
Yeah.
customized overlay to apply.
The manifest apply, the generic portion of it would be the useful component.
So
yeah, and it does the
99%
prunes
of
and all that stuff. Yeah, would stay the same.
99% of the customized controller code is only about applying stuff. Has nothing to do with customized.
Yeah.
There are like 1% of code that does a customized build. That's it. And that build can happen anywhere, because if you don't give it a customized overlay, it will not do any kind of building. It will just get that YAML as it is, because a customized build on a YAML doesn't do anything to that YAML. It just orders the objects in a particular order, like what Flux V1 was doing manually. Now we use the customized library to order objects, like custom resource definitions before custom resources, or namespaces before service accounts. That's the only thing that you need for applying a plain YAML. And that's why we are using the customized library. Another thing that we use from the customized library, and that will not go away even if, let's say, we tell people, hey, run your customized build in a separate thing, is patching all the objects with garbage collection labels. I'm not going to use that with bash and sed. I'm still going to use the customized library because it allows you to do that very nicely from Go. Okay, it's in the customized project now. Maybe it will move to upstream Kubernetes, like case status.
You're talking about KYAML, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Case status, for example, was in customized at some point. Now it has moved to SIG CLI, and we are using it from there. But all these things originated in the customized project. That doesn't mean that, you know, the customized controller code will go away if we tell people to do customized build in a separate pipeline.
Yeah, and it also doesn't mean that if what your opinion is, you know, the strong opinion, Stefan, is moved into an updated architecture for Flux, that we could still certainly use libraries from Customize or anywhere for a controller that's just called an apply controller, you know, and then a separate customized controller could just have that thin shim or something like that.
Yeah, it's almost like customized gen, you know, and like HCL gen, and yeah, CDK's gen, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it sounds interesting.
Yeah, it adds another layer.
Yeah, another way of thinking about this is why we should build a workflow pipeline when there are so many out there. Like you could use Tecton to pull, I don't know, anything, any container, run a bash script that creates some YAML, and from Tecton push to the bucket. Also, Argo Workflows works that way. There are so many tools out there. Are we going to create yet another tool to fight all these other open source projects?
I think one of the only points that I would have on that, and it's just from my perspective, which is biased and has to do with the bullet point, is we do have in development a very unique and best-in-class approach to multi-tenant, you know, users for something like a build system or a pipeline, something that has privilege. And yeah, I mean, it is a differentiating factor. In not all of the projects that are in that space are going to necessarily have a high quality approach that has the same tenancy guarantees that our proposed API would solve. So,
yeah.
But yeah, that's just one attribute. But I agree that it would be good to have some interoperability with, you know, the current like CDF and CNCF projects for doing this kind of manifest generation stuff. And I mean, people can already do it outside their cluster as well, like with GitHub Actions and etc.
Yeah, and I think the best approach is to do it outside. Why? Because one thing is to build from some code, let's say JavaScript code, and build that into a YAML inside the cluster. Another thing is to build it in CI, because if you build it in CI and you push it to a to a branch, then you can trigger another CI action, which does static validation, which runs maybe a kubeval on it, maybe runs a conf test with specific OPA policies that you want to apply on that static YAML. Are we going to create a conf test controller, a kubeval controller, and so on? I really don't like the direction
inside your cluster, yeah. And I definitely agree. I think one of the huge benefits that you get is that config is like super abstract. And when you start working with abstractions like HCL or anything where you're starting to do layers of merging and generation of multiple environments, it can be difficult to understand like what a small change can propagate for. And so when you do commit your manifests to the repository, and there are good ways of doing this without having it bother you all the time. Like GitHub already ignores node modules and vendor directories inside of a pull request. So like even if you're just using make generate locally, you don't even have it in CI yet, like it just goes into a vendor folder for all of your manifests. It gets minimized inside of your diff, but you see the one line change in the JavaScript that you wrote, and then you see how it, like you open up the diff inside of the vendor folder and you can see exactly the line changes that it produced in the Kubernetes manifest, like it might be like a 3-line config change in your JavaScript, but then in the actual pull request, you're able to expand and see as the reviewer, like this is going to change 90 lines of configuration across 7 environments, that in the production environment, there's some extra annotations being added to support some platform features or something like that. And I think that that's like the biggest benefit for like reviewing a what could be a trivial config change with non-trivial consequences, which we have seen, causes like outages at cloud providers. So I think that's the biggest argument for having an outside loop that generates the manifests and maintains them that way.
Yeah, I mean, we made this mistake with Flux 1. We allowed people to run any kind of code generation inside the Flux container. And we got issues like, I typed something wrong and my whole cluster has vanished. Well, of course, because if you mistyped something and your output has, instead of thousands of deployments, just one, how would the tool know that you made a mistake? It will delete everything and keep that only that deployment that's there. Like running
something like that would never pass code review. You're deleting 400,000 lines of YAML. It's like, do you really mean to do this? Yeah. Right?
But if you run it in cluster in some pod, no way you can trace it. And you'll figure out when your whole cluster is gone, your whole stateful sets are deleted, you have no volumes because you used Kubernetes volumes, maybe with no backup, then you end up with, a major disaster. So that's why I'm so reluctant of running these kind of transformations inside the cluster, because we did that with Flux version 1 for 1 year. And looking at the issues and talking with people, it's very hard to debug, almost impossible, because that pod has spin up, has generated something, it has disappeared. How you debug it? Like CI tools have, I don't know, Circle CI allows you to rerun a job. You can exec with SSH inside of it. Are we going to provide all these CI features in Flux? How hundreds of people have to work on this to match what CI is doing just for, some YAML generation?
And generation does not need to be continuous in the same way that reconciliation needs to be. Right? Your config should ideally be static, and it should have static and hermetic results. So there are languages that are closer to that, like, because HCL is just a DSL that produces, like, it's a literal configuration language. Like it can be considered a drop-in replacement for JSON in some ways. It's just more expressive, but it translates one-to-one. And that's, CDK like turns something that is not that, TypeScript and, Java and all of these high level languages like Python. They're very dangerous to be running like in an environment like that. And they try to restrict the execution environment so that it's more like a config language. But yeah, like there's definitely a gradient of tools, that are safer actual configuration versus this is a programming language that I can hurt my cluster with, and can produce erratic results. Yeah.
I think it's good to have an opinion about what we're going to do and we're not, and this kind of falls into the scope. It's like we are limited in the amount of people who can maintain this and do work, and if people, there is a limit where if people want features, they should build the features, and then it might be a good way to have some official, semi-official way of going, oh, these guys built this separate controller that they're maintaining that's compatible with GitOps toolkit, and either they do something that Stefan really doesn't agree with, and they do a lot of magic dynamic generation of YAML in their controller, and that's fine. They can do that, and then they're also responsible for their controller. Or they come up with some really cool idea that we go and say, hey, this was actually super smart, and we couldn't come up with this on our own. We should probably look at how we can make this an official project. So I think that's we need a way of basically inviting people enough to say, hey, you should, like, even if this feature is not here, you should consider building that, and we could then help and communicate, even though we don't get all the grunt work of maintaining the project, because otherwise we might just lose out on some really good ideas just by just going, no, this is never going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think we should create something like a dev guide for the GitOps toolkit. Once we have our Flux CD/package, the runtime package, in good shape, I think we should write documentation on, hey, how, if you want to write a new controller, maybe something that uses a source or whatever, we have these libraries that you can use, and here is how you can use it to create a controller that's compatible with everything that's already there, right? And once you check those requirements, it doesn't matter how your controller does it or not. If it's compatible, it should be there as an optional component. I'm not going to say, oh, if it's running Terraform, I don't know, planning cluster is not good. I really don't care. If I don't have to maintain it, it's not on me. If it fits with the toolkit and it's compatible with Flux install, I'm all for adding it there as an optional component. I have these strong opinions for what Flux should do and the Flux that we've developed, but the optional components can do whatever. I have no beef on that. Can be anything as long as it works, right?
And we see that power of the extensibility and user choice in Kubernetes, right? There's, multiple ways to do validation and admission at different layers, and they have different trade-offs. Cool. It sounds like we made some progress on that. We can come back to this later as it becomes more pertinent in the future.
Can I ask a question about it? So yeah, just so I understand, what we would like to do is perhaps take the customized controller, take out the customized generation, and make it something else that generates YAML from customizations, and use that as like the baseline of how a controller should look like for other projects. So someone could copy the customized controller and make HCL controller or something else. Did I understand that correctly?
That was definitely part of the conversation. Yeah, it was like that could be a reasonable solution. Yeah. It's not something that's happening, but yeah.
And the next question is, and you would also like to include like installers for the other projects with the CLI. So something like a Terraform provider, but for controllers with Flux. And
yeah,
so I do think that sounds really interesting, because then it would be, if we remove all the logic of the reconciliation from what the community members has to write to make their controllers, and only have to write how to generate the manifests, then that part would be so much easier for them to contribute. And if we do something like Terraform registry, it would be really easy to just add on, and we could like add it to the Terraform provider if it's added to the CLI.
Yeah, all the parts are already there. As I said, you can use customize controller to apply in plain YAMLs. You can use source controller to bind to a bucket that's running in the same namespace as source controller, so you can install Minio like we do on our end-to-end testing suite. You install Minio there, then you can push to a bucket from anything, let's say, I don't know, Knative or whatever. You have a function, run something, generate some YAML, and you write back to that bucket. And once you write some YAML to the bucket, that bucket will be reconciled automatically, right? By customized control.
Would it be possible to use config maps instead?
What?
Would it be possible to use something like a config map instead of a S3 bucket?
You can put in an S3 bucket any kind of Kubernetes YAML. It's a replacement for a Git repository.
Yeah, but my question was, would it be possible to use a config map instead of an S3 bucket, so you don't have to add Minio?
If we added config map support to source controller, then that would be, what you would.
It has character limits, I guess, so that would be kind of a, I don't know.
Yeah, 4K, which it's a lot. People are doing it, but yeah, I don't know if we could definitely have a design doc that says we shouldn't do it. You know, I think it's a reasonable argument. But yeah, anyway, it's a really nuanced conversation. No decisions being made, but certainly things that we can learn from the way that HashiCorp did providers and how they manage their community, where repos live, how providers get shipped. And then there's also the whole discussion about moving manifest generation to patterns that are outside the cluster because it's just better for operators. There's an argument. Cool. Let's move on. Philip, we should get to your personal access token deploy key thing. What did you want to talk about here? It's
just really quick. I had a session with Stefan and I added something to the documentation about that. It's just a general information so everybody hears this. So when you create a deploy key with a personal access token as an authentication method, which we do with the Flux CLI, the personal access token is actually linked to the deploy key. So if you go and remove your personal access token, the deploy key will be deleted.
Oh.
Yes, I realized this while cleaning up my personal access tokens and just going, you are going to delete dev QA int prod deploy keys now.
Would we avoid this with password off, I suppose?
Yeah, so I created a PR in the GitHub CLI project to expose their Go package that reads their config. And my thought was because the CLI does OAuth authentication, and it stores the OAuth token, which it does the refresh and everything in a file, as most like Azure and AWS CLI does. So my idea there was, okay, expose this, have the Flux CLI import that package and just read the OAuth token, work around the problem. They are not willing to do that. They basically say, this is a CLI, not the GitHub library, so and we don't want other people using our config file. So never going to happen, or probably not going to happen within the next couple of years. Yeah.
What I think we should tell people for non-playing around usage, for production usage, they should create a Flux user. They should create tokens for each cluster and don't use SSH, use tokens to connect. That means, because now we are also adding the image automation feature, and that means Flux will write back to your Git repos. And there are many things that we can learn from Flux V1. For example, protected branches. you cannot you cannot configure a deploy key with, hey, I want this deploy key to push the protected branch, but anyone else cannot do it, and so on. But with the user, you can do it. So the recommendation will be create a user, create tokens per clusters, and the image automation controller should not use an organization employee key. It shouldn't, when it commits, it shouldn't say, hey, I'm committing as Stefan. That's not right, because it's not Stefan that's committing, it's Flux that's committing it. So you should give Flux an identity that you can easily tell, looking at the commits. Flux should also sign its commits with PGP. And that means you have visibility. And if you want to disable Flux from a particular repo, you can just go and delete that token from the Flux user administration. And that's
or change the user's write permissions temporarily.
Yes. Remove it from the repo or give it only read-only access.
You could just
that moment on,
switch it to read-only, and it stops all image automation immediately. But then you get it back when you turn it back on.
None of this is possible with the deploy key. I mean, the deploy key is nice for, let's play around. But
well, you can change the deploy key to read, but other stuff you can't.
Yeah. With
not multi-repo cross-org stuff. It's only per repo.
So the docs are updated, but it's just we need to document all these kind of more production-ready scenarios there.
Yeah, sweet. Thanks for keeping that quick. It's good that we have that warning in there. That's an interesting thing about the GitHub CLI config thing. There's no reason that we couldn't just use their stuff anyway, even if they don't like it. But yeah, I guess it's important to consider being polite. But an OAuth flow for GitHub, I mean, there's also the hub CLI. They might be more open to that, or it might already be.
Both of them are part of GitHub now, so I think it's the same maintainers.
It's the same team is responsible for both. But I don't know. It might be possible with existing hub libraries already. Yeah. As opposed to asking for the GHCLI to change things. So I think they do use a different config folder and different config file structure. But Simon mentioned don't want to use the same access token between tenant 1 and tenant 2. It's depending on what you're accessing and what your security model is. Definitely want to be able to support using multiple access tokens for different stuff. And I think that has a lot to do with the impersonation proposal, which I have a handful of minutes to talk about. If you haven't had a chance to read this, it is a little bit heavy. I tried to be really clear and accurate, but also concise. This document is, I think, several hundred lines long, and it's dense. Every sentence means something in relation to RBAC or user impersonation or some API field in Flux. Would really appreciate, especially if you're a user, it comes with some kind of usability consequences that we would like to make as easy as possible to not be a problem. But this is a granular approach to permissions, really. The thing about what we're doing with Flux is that when you want to apply some things to the cluster, that apply essentially has a purpose and an identity that's long-lived. And so that anytime you want to apply manifest, that thing, it really has an identity. How do we give that thing an identity? And we've done some hacks with service accounts and things like that, and made it optional. The heart of the proposal here is to use Kubernetes impersonation features to create a separate user namespace inside of Kubernetes that Flux can own and trust and namespace within. It uses the same security model as service accounts without the dependencies on crypto, and it makes it required. It also inserts it into a bunch of other places that are not just applying manifests, so that you can control who has access to which sources and that kind of thing, as well as when you alert. It's the event sources, as well as the there's a denial of service one for receivers. Yeah. So those are also protected by this user, this Flux user approach. So please read the proposal. I included some examples. There are quite a few, but definitely not everything needed to completely understand it. So if you go through the proposal and something's unclear, let's talk it through, modify the proposal if needed, and then write some more examples. Hopefully before we actually implement any of this stuff, it's already like really solid that what we're doing is not going to blow like a massive security hole in somebody's cluster. The goal is to fix the security problems with the GitOps and CI approaches that we currently have with Kubernetes, which, for the record, every project out there right now has some major multi-tenancy security issue. So the goal here is let's be the first to not have any tenancy problems, at least glaring, like really easily exploitable ones. So please review it, and if you know any security people who are like good at Kubernetes stuff, like please ask them to review this as well. Leave their comments, and let's do the best thing possible. So, link is in the thing. We are at the end of our time block, but
yeah. No, good job, Leo, on that proposal. I agree with most of it. Yeah, there are, of course, API changes that I have other opinions on, but the idea of using a user group, a prefix that's fixed for Flux and built in by default without having to rely on admission controllers like the current multi-tenancy implementation is a good step forward.
And this directly addresses what Simon just made a note about, which is like having tenants be able to segment so that their access tokens are not accessible by each other, and that anything that they do, say writing back to GitHub, be it a repository or a registry, and also not GitHub specific things, but other providers, that those access tokens, be it a Docker registry or whatever, buckets, would be properly tenantized. So sweet. And yeah, and thank you for doing that review, Stefan. Michael as well was super fast to jump on a very detailed review, so appreciate it.
Yeah, there are some big issues with how cloud providers have implemented IAM role bindings, but we can talk another day about that. It's a problem that comes from outside Kubernetes, and they've implemented at pod level by mounting files, which makes Kubernetes impersonation useless without spinning a pod for each tenant every time you want to reconcile something.
Yeah, this is not as much of a concern because the majority of things that we need to interact with in the Flux API are directly within Kubernetes. We don't really need to. It would be for anything that we want to add to the current APIs that talks directly to the cloud provider API, which could be done through a controller instead. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't need a Google service account if I don't need to talk to Google APIs. If I'm talking to Kubernetes APIs only.
Oh yeah. If you use PGP to encrypt your secrets, you're fine. But if you don't, if you want to use some cloud provider,
KMS stuff, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or the bucket source, would that be affected in that case?
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
Because you have to mount
everything that touches a cloud API goes through an IAM role that's binding to a pod, so you cannot bind.
The escape hatch here is that it's not tenantized, but you can add those cloud service accounts. You can bind them to the controller IAM role, or the controller service account. You can bind the IAM role. the controller SA that does that particular thing. So like you could, for your cluster, you could give a source controller access to all of the AWS buckets that you need. It doesn't support multi-account, but so.
Yeah, that's kind of, it works as long as you're in AWS or I guess GKE land. But like, for example, Azure does not implement IAM binding through service accounts, which is like a major, honestly, it's a stupid choice from them to do something that's different from everybody else. But
what does Azure do?
They have,
labels.
So they have a project called AAD pod identity. So you run it in your cluster and then you label your pod with like identities, like identity names, and then it basically looks at your identity labels.
So if you have the ability to create a pod in an Azure cluster, then you can assume any role.
Unless you actually lock it down with constraints, yes. And then there's a bunch of other stuff, like you can do host nets. You can do really fun stuff if you don't lock down your cluster, where you can like just ignore a pod identity and just like assume any role anyways, because you're just sending the identity name.
Yeah, you would have to modify your approach to security significantly if you wanted to do multi-tenancy inside of an Azure cluster that has that feature enabled.
Yeah,
I like the chuckle from
we
someone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting.
We do multi-tenancy in Azure for customers. It's a challenge.
Nice.
It's a challenge.
I mean, I think step one would probably be disable that feature. There's other ways to get an Azure identity. You can just put it in a secret. Yeah.
Yeah, we did that before, but then you have the
Nice.
problem of the secret rotation inside of the cluster, and then we want to have clusters that are ephemeral.
Sounds like you could do Azure's job for them and just write a controller.
Haven't you seen all the commits Philip has done lately? Everything has been around doing Microsoft's job.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks to the Azure team and all of the folks who contribute to Azure on this call. But yeah. Cool.
Just to let you know, the next week and the week after, we are going to cancel the meetings. And yeah, Slack will be not so much engaging from our part. I plan to log off Slack and GitHub, so you'll not be able to reach me. I don't know about
User
that.
support is going to suck for anyone experimenting over the holidays, and that's probably just debt that we have to, it's just a trade-off. Everyone needs to go enjoy their lives and log off. So yeah. Cool. Thanks everyone for staying over.
Bye-bye.
Hey,
yeah.
Thank you.
Everyone take care of yourselves. Good to see you.
Happy holidays.
Yeah.
Happy holidays.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.
Happy holidays.